I don't know.
Straight Talk. Money Matters, international news, celebrity interviews, sports,
If I'm being discriminated based on my race, it's not.
politics, race.
Let's switch it around. Let's talk healthcare.
Straight Talk with award-winning journalist Lloyd Geit.
Hello and welcome to Straight Talk. I'm your host, Lloyd Geit. Our special guest on today's show is none other than the Reverend Jesse Jackson. As you probably know, he is the head of the Rainbow Push Coalition, which is based in Chicago. Thank you so much for joining us on Straight Talk today. How are you?
Well, you've been interviewing me since I was a little boy. I feel humbled.
It has been quite a while since we've
Good to
last
see
seen one
you.
another. I actually pulled out some of the old photos of you and I together, but I promise I won't say anything about any of that. Racism, it is still alive and well in this country. We have heard lots of people say things that are really racist. What is your take on this whole reemergence of racism?
One is, it seems the reaction to President Obama's election, there is this wave of Americans seeking to find common ground who elected him overwhelmingly. And then once he's there, it's like midday in our politics as a nation. Then midnight comes, the undercurrent comes. So a congressman from South Carolina, where the fresh Civil War shot was fired, calls him a liar, and goes home and raises $2 million that weekend. Others, you're not a Christian, you are a Muslim in a pejorative way. You're not one of us, you don't serve our God. Another, you were not born here. You are illegitimate. And at the heart of this birther issue is legitimacy. You are not legitimate. But that legitimacy question does not just apply to him being illegitimate, but the whole social justice agenda is seen as illegitimate. So Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, illegitimate. The Civil Rights Commission, which did research, illegitimate. The affirmative action, illegitimate. The voting rights, as a matter of fact, today the use of the voter ID as a way of, if you don't have a long birth certificate, you have to try to purchase it, which amounts to a poll tax. So many seniors will not use a birth certificate to register. They have to prove they're Americans twice. Students on campuses may not have it, so they cannot vote easily. We won that battle back in '74. You go to shopping centers, other churches, to register and vote without a birth certificate, you can't do it. So it seems that every gain made in the last 50 years, except young blacks playing in college athletics, is under attack.
Does it surprise you that in 2011, 2012, we're still having to deal with these kinds of things?
Well, we've seen the pendulum swing. We see after 246 years of slavery, the 13th Amendment, passing by one vote, I might add. You have radical Reconstruction in 1877 ends. 1896, you're back to legal apartheid laws. Women fighting for the right to vote, but not the right of self-determination. Workers dying for the right to vote, and today denying the workers the right to collective bargaining. We win the 54 decision to make apartheid illegal in our own country, and then but by all deliberate speed, and it never quite speeds up enough. And so you see this is the 150th year of the Civil War, and the states' writers have dug in yet again to undermine the one big tent America. And so for this woman's right, they wouldn't hold up the entire budget on the argument of woman's, denying a woman the right to self-determination, for example. Wisconsin denying workers the right to collective bargaining, the voter ID bill. So one sees a whole body of, a whole wave that's seeking to undermine that which made all of us so proud in 2008.
It appears that African Americans have been silent on this issue of racism. Does that surprise you? I mean, the silence seems to be killing African Americans.
Well, it seems as if we've been a bit traumatized because the fact is we are receding. Report came out, unemployment in the nation is maybe 8.9, for blacks around 16.1. But in cities like Houston and in New York and Chicago and Milwaukee, it's up in the 40s, for example. And yet there's a kind of eerie silence. We're number one in infant mortality, number one in short life expectancy, number one targeted on the home foreclosure scheme by the big banks. The banks were bailed out and we were locked out of that deal. And so the fact of the matter is we are facing on all of our civil rights, social gains, agenda items, and attack, and there's been much too much silence. I think, Lord, the part of the manipulation, the assumption that to challenge these policies is to challenge the president, which we're reluctant to do because we voted for him, we want him, and yet we must distinguish between the policies that are now coming down the line from the Congress and our commitment to him. I remember Dr. King supported Kennedy over Nixon. We still had the March on Washington as a matter of public policy for public accommodations. That was not an anti-Kennedy march, it was a pro-civil rights march. Exactly. He supported Johnson over Goldwater. And Johnson was reluctant for the Voting Rights Act to come south because he knew if the Voting Rights Act came south, white Democrats would become white conservatives or Republicans. But we still had the march for the right to vote, so that at the end of the day, our inaction does not serve the president well, nor does it serve racial justice well. So it's not enough to have freedom without having equal opportunity, racial justice, and peace high up on the agenda. It's not sometimes altogether silent, it's all the matter of getting media space. I mean, there's more interest, in a wedding in Britain than a tornado in Alabama, Mississippi. And there's more interest in Donald Trump than there is in the issue of the growing gap between the have and have-nots in our country. And let us not forget, we had 300 billionaires about 10 years ago. Now it's 1,000 billionaires. So more wealth up top, the wealthy have no roof, the poor have no floor, and we're fighting 3 wars. This is one hell of a predicament. And workers, jobs are going out to cheap labor markets, and content is coming in. So American worker is really in a kind of squeeze play. And some people in that economic anxiety are turning on the wrong people. Those jobs do not go from white to black, from male to female. They did not go from white to black or brown. They went from here to yonder. I'm a bit, not so much surprised, but disappointed at just how toxic the environment has become after such a great opportunity for all of us to go forward.
Let's talk a little further about this whole thing about racism. There are new forms of racism. Let's talk a little bit about that.
The rather overt form was name calling. But now you have a kind of wolf in sheep clothing racism. It manifests itself a lot, for example, in public transportation. In Wisconsin, one of the issues focused on was the workers' right to collective bargaining. The issue Dr. King was killed about in Memphis in 1968. But the deeper issue, more pernicious one is the governor refuses to accept $800 to $1 billion for a fast rail transportation. Well, why is he refusing that money and crying broke? Because you have the most segregated city in America now, according to the latest data, is Milwaukee, number 4 in poverty. So you have over here 50% black male unemployment and great impoverishment. The jobs over here. If you build the fast rail, it antagonizes many of these whites because they know if people come here to work, they may come here to live. And so they're willing to, in fact, block the jobs transportation door. And while it's blocked, the school door interfering with equal protection, there was a commitment to get involved. But today the governor is using denying access to jobs in transportation as a form of racial separation and resegregation. Chicago, the train stops at 95th Street going south. Chicago is to 135th Street. The jobs are northwest. Well, if you're on welfare, you can't own a car. If public transportation, you can't get to the job, but don't know what the job is, you're unemployed. So that is not as a name-calling, tobacco-spitting kind of racism, but it's kind of institutional separation from access to jobs, and therefore access to education and housing and healthcare. So you see this kind of emergence of a kind of radical resegregation. Now there's a cover of it. You have high-profile black athletes and artists and entertainment. So you're kind of covering up the stuff with new faces as diversion, but dealing with the fact that 2.4 million Americans are in prison, 1 million plus 1 are African American men, more in jail than in college. And all the data shows in the who's arrested, sentenced, and convicted is based upon race. We deserve better. Even the home foreclosure crisis, the data proves that blacks and browns were targeted, steered, and clustered, given these toxic subprime products. The impact while blacks and browns took the first hit on the home foreclosure crisis, for every 1 homeless in foreclosure, 7 others go underwater. So neither of us can pay taxes. And so then in the end, everybody loses. What we learned from athletics, what we learned to be, we pulled for Houston, Dallas. When the walls came down, you couldn't have had the Houston Texans or the Dallas Cowboys or the Atlanta Falcons behind the cotton curtain. You couldn't have had the Olympics behind the cotton curtain. When the walls came down and we elevated the South to its national stature, out of it came presidents. Out of it came foreign investment. Our civil rights struggle made the New South. It's like slavery held back the Old South. And yet today there is a spirit among many in the country that is in fact hurting our growth. The thing about athletics that fascinates people so much is that why do blacks and browns do so well on the athletic field? Football, basketball, golf, tennis. Because whenever the playing field is even, and the rules are public, and the goals are clear, and the referee is fair, we do well. So on the field where you have a kind of inherent sense of justice, we all can celebrate the outcome. The loser loses with dignity, the winner wins with some measure of glory, but there's a sense of next game. Beyond the playing field, the field is not even. The rules are not public. The goals are not clear. The referee is not fair. 2 years ago, we went to China in the Olympics as Americans. We won our share of gold, silver, and bronze medals because before we went to hear the rules, even playing field. Now, trade policy, we don't have play-by-one set of rules, and so we lose. So it is important that we keep fighting. That's why Equal Employment Opportunity Commission should mean something to all of us. You look at the 100 top corporations in Texas, and let's measure them not by freedom, measure them by their top 20 execs, measure them by their boards of directors, measure them by their vendors, measure them by who does financial transactions, measure them by their law firms. And one will find that aside from a spot here or there, there's not a will to, in fact, integrate us vertically and horizontally. And we didn't know how good baseball could be till everybody could play. We realized how good corporate America can be till everybody can play. So it's a contradiction to be fighting for a free market with unfair market tools.
I want to talk about President Barack Obama. If you had to grade him, what kind of a grade would you give him?
Give him a strong B. He's faced a headwind unlike we've ever known before. When I think about his grades being challenged, and Mr. McCain got into Annapolis and he finished, 2 from the bottom. So Barack finishes cum laude and Mr. McCain laude. Then you have the case of Sarah Palin, who went to a different school, 4 or 5, over a 5 or 6 year period, which is all right, except it's just how you would invest in these persons and not challenge their credentials. I mean, the credentials are not an issue except they made it. I mean, Truman didn't go to college. So that's not an issue until you make it an issue and you force a comparison. So challenging his place of birth was bogus diversion. His academic credentials are bogus diversion. But it is a calculation to make him illegitimate. When he came in, the banks, because of lack of oversight and greed, had taken us to the brink. And he made a move, I thought a necessary move, to bail them out, but not linked to lending and reinvestment. So the banks not bail out. They are now awash in capital, like $2 trillion, but home foreclosure on the rise. That's why we make it a B. The oil companies, they have made the $1 trillion in profits since 9/11. It is still getting tax subsidy. At Christmas time, the richest Americans get a extended the Bush tax cut that amounts to about $1 trillion over 10 years, $200 billion. Well, there's more money in the tax cut for the wealthy Americans than all the state budget deficits combined. So a kind of a belief, if you bail out the rich, they bail out the rest of us. Rising tide lift all boats. That is not a theory that works. But his effort to try to turn around a crisis in our economy.
Let's talk about what I call the dumbing down of America, the whole Sarah Palin factor. What are your thoughts on her, and do you think she's a credible presidential candidate?
I don't know much about her. I read a lot about her. I never see her identified with the quest to put America back to work, which is my focus. I never see her identified with stop home foreclosures, a big deal. I never see her identified with some plan to provide more Americans health care. 59 million Americans have no health insurance, and the fees of insurance companies keep rising. The 50 million Americans who are in poverty, work became break the poverty cycle. 49 million Americans are food insecure. 44 million are on food stamps. And yet the issues that matter, she does not weigh in on them.
I want to talk a little bit about something that Bill Cosby said recently, comments about the African American church. How do you feel about what he said, and was it justified?
What is this criticism?
Well, he actually said that he didn't see the African American church trying to clean up their communities. He said that the Muslims will not allow prostitutes into their neighborhoods, and they will not allow drug dealers into their neighborhoods, but that the African American church has largely been silent. What are your thoughts on that?
That's a very broad statement. I mean, some black churches have very active programs of home construction and building community centers and getting job training and the like, and so some may be less so. But one should not paint the black church as such a broad stroke. And no one has successfully stopped the flow of drugs and guns in our country. I mean, black people don't have a single gun shop in America, and we don't manufacture guns. So, and we've not used that power to stop to ban semi-automatic weapons, for example. I mean, we are in a mess because we're not being afforded equal protection under the law. And I think that all of us, we would do well to find a constructive way to embrace each other, not to attack in that way.
When you look at where we are as a people, as African Americans, unemployment is ridiculously high, school dropouts, teen pregnancy, drug use. Are you optimistic about us as a people?
You know, when I was in Birmingham, Alabama, just a few days ago, Tuscaloosa, Alabama, the thing about this year, 50 years ago, were the Freedom Rides. When the buses came into Anniston, Alabama, they would set a fire. And in Birmingham, they met a mob. And now blacks and whites are voting together in so many ways. I looked at crisis with the tornado came to and see black and white churches together, feeding people. I mean, I see signs of progress. I remember coming to Houston with Dr. King in 1967, during the height of the anti-Vietnam War protests. He had Dr. King and Andy Young and Harry Belafonte and Aretha Franklin at the height of her career. And tickets were $25 each. At the Houston Arena downtown, we couldn't sell 500 tickets. Dr. King was on the attack. And when he walked on that stage with Belafonte and Andy Young and Aretha Franklin to give Aretha some roses, somebody put tear gas in the fans right here in Houston, Texas. Well, that wouldn't happen today. One sees more civility today than one saw then. When you look at, we now take for granted having blacks in virtually every state legislature or in city council. So to see the emergence of blacks and browns and the women, that is new. We did not have, getting a woman on the Supreme Court was a big deal. Now there are two. So one sees a layer of progress of socialization. But what one, I think, may have missed today is that the growth of wars, I mean, $1.2 trillion for Afghan and Iraq, and now expanding into Libya, the concentration of wealth, where more and more money is in the hands of fewer and fewer people, and so wealth is up and jobs are down. I think that today we look at the kind of radical economic polarization that is as devastating as the horizontal racial polarization once was.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Reverend Jesse Jackson, and thank you for joining us today on Straight Talk. We will be back next week with yet another exciting program. Stay with us.
Straight Talk with award-winning journalist Lloyd Geit.